chatting here, and the session is about to begin. We're going to have a conversation with Tom Steyer, who you need no introduction, but if you want to know who he is, the material I think it was distributed. And I'm Gerald Torres, and I'm at the law school and at the School of the Environment. And as I was telling Tom earlier, I had the remarkable good fortune of being able to sit down in the bar at the Mayflower Hotel and tell each other stories. So that was a long time ago, but I really appreciate it. Thank you, Tom, for joining us here today. I want to start out with a question that you're one of the few people who really can answer this, right? That you ran a serious campaign for the presidency, which means that you were committed to a vision for the country, and you got to meet Americans, right? In state after state, place after place. And I want to know what you learned and how that influenced the way you think about what you got to be doing with your organizing, going forward. I don't know if you have anything to say about that. Let's just talk about that.
Let me say this, Gerald. So I started running for president, I think it was somewhere around the middle of 2019. And I had been running for 2 years prior to that, a campaign about impeaching Mr. Trump. And before that, for probably another 6 years before that, I'd been running an organization, NextGen America, which is an organization to organize young voters, engage, enlist, empower them in terms of, and let them have a huge impact on the future of our country politically. Mm-hmm. But none of it was as intense as running for president, because every single day you're meeting people face to face, talking to them, but also listening to them, learning from them. One of the best experiences of my whole life, maybe the best professional experience I've ever had. I loved meeting Americans. I loved the people I met. I genuinely learned from them and enjoyed it. And so let me give you some examples. I mean, I had run a campaign in California to protect progressive energy laws in 2010. So almost 10 years before. And we'd run that campaign against 2 oil companies based on job creation and environmental justice. And, so I'd been talking about the disproportionate poisoning of Black and brown communities around this country for 10 years. And I'd talked to people who are leaders in that. I'd been to the communities. I'd fought to close fossil fuel plants that were polluting some of those communities, specifically in California around Oxnard, but also gone to those communities and talked to people in churches mostly to see what it felt like, where you see decimation, but still going around the country and meeting people from South Carolina or Alabama or Georgia and hearing those stories directly from human beings whose kids are sick, whose husbands are dying. I met not dozens of people, but I met and made a personal connection that continues with people like that in South Carolina. I also met some of the most, it wasn't just a victim thing. These are people who turned it around, who'd become leaders, who'd pushed projects. There's a guy named Harold Mitchell who's absolutely inspirational and brilliant, whose family was poisoned. And that's what got him into it. There's a woman named Deanna Barry, exact same thing. She's not a victim. Her family was being poisoned. Her husband was at risk of dying. She became a political activist in the community. So there was a ton of stuff like that. But I also met, and it kind of breaks your heart, but it also gives you incredible, commitment. I met people like nurses who were, so here's some people, they're not all women, probably the group I'm talking to in this specific instance were probably 80% women, mental health nurses who were getting beat up on the job and then fired because they were injured. Now here people, they're nurses. They chose to go into helping other people's healthcare. And then they went into mental health. So they have people who are really troubled. They're in facilities. Some of the people were quite petite. and they're getting entirely mistreated. I mean, imagine getting beat up on the job as part of your job and then getting fired for getting beat up on your job. I felt as if it was a great education for me, both in understanding how different people's lives work in a way that I could never have learned except face to face. But also, I felt like it was such an inspiration for me to see really how deeply good people are, Americans are, how smart, how committed. I never, even people I completely disagree with, the people who would come and, want to give me a hard time, my attitude was, say what you have to say. If you have something to say that I can't answer, that I'm going to reconsider. So I'm not going to let you monopolize the conversation and shut everybody else out. But you certainly have a right to express what you think, and I want to hear it. And I'm going to incorporate it into the way I think about things. And it's not a threat to me. I thought it was, Gerald, so inspirational. I'll say one last thing is this. So my daughter, who also went to Yale, I can't remember what class she is. She's 29 years old. She's at Yale. She took a couple months off. She works in London to go door to door for me. So I said, Evie, what'd you think of your experience? She said, best experience of my life. Huge privilege to meet people at the door. Every day, people told me things they didn't tell their best friends and maybe not their family. Every day, someone cried, then I cried. Made me a better person, made me more religious. And I said, Ev, how can it make you more religious? You don't even believe in God. And she goes, now I do. It's a deeply spiritual thing, Gerald, to see what people go through and how bravely and compassionately they respond.
Mm-hmm. No, one of the reasons I wanted to ask you that question is because, it's a rare kind of education, right? It's a rare kind of education. And you're not, as I said, you're one of the few people who actually have gotten that.
I'm looking at you. I remember I was in Nevada meeting with some Native Americans. One guy stayed after. He's a filmmaker. And he said he's making a film about the 5,000 missing Native women. So I knew there were 5,000 missing Native.
Right.
And he said, do you know why they're missing? And I said, no, I don't. I know that there's no trace of them and law enforcement has no idea what's going on. He said, it's very highly correlated with fracking. I said, I hope you're not telling me what I think you're telling me. He goes, no, that's exactly what I'm telling you. I said, okay.
Right.
I just something about pain and fear and desperation and death.
Right. Well, one of the really important things you just said, though, in describing this is your recognition that you're not working with victims, right? You're working with people who are committed to change, right? And so that has to drive the way you think about organizing or philanthropy. And how did this change the way you approach organizing?
Well, I've always believed in bottom up. Look, for goodness sakes, I'm talking to a Yale audience. I went to Yale. My father went to Yale Law School. 2 of my kids went to Yale. I'm not kidding myself about whether I'm a privileged person in American society. I think it's really important. I think everything that we know at this point suggests we need information coming up from the bottom, not information going from the top down. And so my organizing, that's why NextGen was always about registering, engaging, empowering young people, because that's the biggest generation in American history. It's by far the most diverse generation, by far. It's the most progressive generation in America, was voting at half the rate of other Americans. How are we going to have a true representational democracy if the biggest age cohort, which is different from everybody else, is participating at half the rate? And no one else wanted to do it.
Right.
One of the things I know you're really asking about is, how do you choose what to do? Well, something that other people aren't going to do because they didn't think it could be done, or they thought it was too expensive, or they didn't think it was worth it. I think it was mostly about the expense, to be honest. And I felt like it has to happen.
Well, to me, that makes perfect sense, right? You say, okay, what isn't getting done?
And if you look, right. I've tried to say, not what has the biggest impact on me, not what makes it, is what has the biggest impact that if I don't do it, nobody else will. And
Right.
you can go look and see the stuff I've done has been either unpopular or people believed it couldn't. When we ran that prop in 2010, I co-chaired it with George Shultz, who just passed away last week.
Mm-hmm.
But the reason we were co-heading it is because no one else wanted to do it because they thought we're going to lose. We got 70% of the vote. But the reason that it came to me was because everyone else was like, it's a hot potato, and I definitely don't want to hold it.
Right. Well, I think one of the things you said, right, is that I think that's really important, is that you're in a position to think about organizing, think about supporting others in ways that other people won't. Not because it's the wrong idea, but because it's important. But people look at it as iffy or hazardous,
Gerald,
or
need to impeach. I mean, up with 8 to 9 million signatures. I think, this is a time when we can say safely, this guy is a thug. He's a criminal. He was willing to take down the American government and the American society for his own purposes. I think we've all seen that on TV. But no one wanted to run need to impeach when we started. And it was clear then too.
Right. No, I think that's that's really important, because before we started, we came on the air or on the live, whatever we are online, right? We were talking about being in some ways a special historical moment, right? Where we actually can see what needs to get done. Right? Is that what drives your efforts?
Well, I think we're at an inflection point in terms of climate. And I think we're that this is our one shot. I think we're at an inflection point in terms of race. But this is a great shot, but it's not like our only ever shot. This is our best shot so far. It's a real inflection point. And I'd say similarly in terms of economic justice. So I really feel as if, but the climate stuff is really something where I feel I've spent 10 to 15 years saying we have to do this. And I think our society has come around to the idea that we have to do this. Now the question is, how do we do this? And can we do this fast enough? We can definitely do it. But we're at this point of stop talking about whether we have to do this. Case closed. Argument over. Now it is, how are we going to do this? And how do we organize ourselves to do this successfully? Because this is our one chance.
So how do you approach that? I think you're exactly right. I think the place we've gotten to, right, is we no longer have to convince people. We know what the challenge is. Right. The question is, are we up to the challenge?
I don't think you can separate, my opinion, Gerald. So I didn't mean to cut you off, but I don't think we can separate, and I don't think we'll win on climate if we separate climate from racial justice, from environmental justice, and from economic justice. So I think to get it done practically, we also have to get it done morally and spiritually. And so that means including and leadership positions, people from communities that have been disproportionately poisoned. It means including people representing workers. It means having one of the things that I think really strongly, look, do I know we have to do a bunch of technological things about electricity generation? Yes. Do I know we have to do things about clean transportation? Yeah, I believe that's been drilled into my skull. I live in California. I've been in the business world for more than 30 years. I'm interested in all of those technologies and all of that change. But I view that as the hardware. Do we have to change the hardware of our society? Yes. And that's the Build Back Better plan of the Biden administration. Yes, I get that. But if we're actually going to have a sustainable world, is it really going to be done by Elon Musk and an electric vehicle? No, Is that an essential thing? Yes. But is that going to get us a sustainable world? Absolutely not. What is going to get us a sustainable world? Different attitudes by people on the planet, different relationships between people on the planet. And, if there was one thing that would really change this world, be the education and empowerment of girls and young women.
I think a couple of things. One, I think you're right on that last point. And offline, I'll tell you stories because they are legion, right? But the thing I want to ask you about is you've now connected, right? You went out and you met people all across the country, right? Which I think is incredibly a valuable education. And you know what has to get done, right? What do you see yourself? How do you see yourself joining the justice issue with the environment issue? Because I think you're right. I think the justice lens is absolutely critical for solving the underlying attitudinal,
Totally.
Spiritual changes that need to happen, right?
I don't think you can think about climate without thinking about justice. I don't think you'll get the right policies.
Right.
I don't think you will win practically. I don't think you will win politically. And I'll give you an example. They were going to build a natural gas plant in Oxnard in a poor Latino neighborhood, the so-called Puente plant, bridge plant. And if you go down to Oxnard, it's on the California coast. The California coast, is by and large this incredibly beautiful, long, very diverse, but a really incredible stretch of the world, except for Oxnard, which has lots of chemical plants and power plants, and it's very polluted and it's very industrial and it's very poor. And they were going to build, I think it was 3 years ago, another natural gas plant for the next 40 years. And there was a group of people, including the mayor of Oxnard, who's a great person, who'd organized against it. And we went down and organized with them to push back. It had already been approved. No one was pushing back against it. But think about it. A 40-year natural gas plant on the coast of California in a poor Latino neighborhood. It makes no sense on any level. No sense. It turned around because of those people. Did we help them? Yes. Were we, did we have some organizational skills and some, relationships so we could push that with them harder than they could push by themselves? Yes. Could it have happened without them? Absolutely not. Absolutely.
I'm assuming that the lessons you applied in Oxnard, right, are the lessons you've learned and accumulated through all of your activities.
Honestly, my belief in all this stuff, Gerald, is what you really need to do is figure out what's morally right. Get that high ground. Get your crew of people who are on that ground with you hard as hell, and then push.
I mean, I'm actually heartened to hear that, right? Because there are a couple of things. You're saying, look, I have the capacity to help organize. But one of the things that's going to, and tell me if I'm misstating this, right? That one of the things that's going to drive my organization are the ethical conditions surrounding the change they want to create. And whether, when we get to the point that we're trying to get to, we'll have changed the baseline so that we can make further progress. Right. I mean,
I really believe it doesn't happen in the, immediately, honest to goodness. I mean, you could, as someone who grew up in the civil rights revolution, it doesn't happen immediately.
Right.
They're just pulling down the statues of Robert E. Lee. Now. I know there can be a big lag. But I really believe that the way things get done are when you've thought through, if you and I sit down and think together, this is really right. We need to convince other people. We need to get to the people who are most directly affected by this. And then we need to not give in.
Right. Right. No, I was going to say,
That's what I believe
I'm
in,
sorry.
that attitude, and that really, because it's like, I always say to people when we're in a fight with companies about pollution or climate, it's like they're in this situation where it's a bet. They're willing to spend this much money on this bet for this return, but we're not. If we start losing, we don't stop.
Right.
We have to double down. There's not a bluff. We're in it.
Right.
You have to kill us.
Right.
Because we're not bluffing. We're going.
Right. I mean, that's a kind of moral position, right? That actually multiplies your power. It sounds like, right? Because it in a sense it's not about winning a particular battle, but it's a horizon issue, right?
Well,
So
we
you're
did this
looking
thing.
at a
I've run a
different
bunch of
horizon.
these props, Gerald.
Right.
And I've run them in California and I've run them outside California to show that the people of America really want clean energy. They want to deal with the climate crisis, and we can do it in a way that's economically good in terms of jobs and costs. Lower electricity costs and create thousands of jobs. And we've won them outside of California, partly to win, but partly to make the point. So we have lost one time.
Right.
And the one time we lost was in Arizona, where we were going to win. And then for corrupt reasons, they changed the proposition on the ballot so that it was very misleading. And if you read it, you would go like, well, I'm not going to vote for that. That sounds terrible. But actually, it was them changing it at the last minute to mislead voters. And when it was over, they said, are you going to go away? And we're like, we're not going away. We're not thinking about going away. They changed the wording and that was wrong. And we can show you why they did it and it was corrupt. But we're not going anywhere. We're going to come back and do this again. And then they came and settled with us. Because it was like, no, this is important. It's not a game. It's not a bet. It's not anything. This is about something that's deeply impactful for every innocent person in this state, in this country, on this planet. We're not walking away from that.
Right. Which is, being able to make that commitment, right? And looking at something like NextGen, right? Where you're saying, look, we've got to empower this generation because they're the ones we're going to be gone, right? But they're going to lead the struggle in the way that if in the direction they start now. Like there's a friend of mine who's just recently passed away, but his goal was to reclaim.
I've canoed on the LA River. He's done a hell of it. It's a lot better, Gerald.
Yeah. But when he started, people said, you're crazy, right? You're crazy. And he said, look, there's no reason we can't bring green back to LA, right? Now, somebody asked a question that I saw, I'm going to read it. I can't see who asked it now, but he agrees with you on the moral preconditions for climate change and to accomplish climate change. But what he's worried about is whether we have the time, given the ticking clock that we have on climate change, to push for the kind of broad systemic change that you're advocating.
Well, first
what
of
would
all,
you tell him?
Nobody knows where we are. There was a really good article, which I would recommend to anybody who's listening who hasn't read it. I think February 3rd in the Atlantic by a guy named Brannon, putting in context where we are in geological time. So what the world looked like under these circumstances 10,000, 50,000, 2 million, 50 million years ago. Look, the world is very complicated, more complicated than any of us can understand, and we're in uncharted territory. So we don't know where we are. Can we prevent the worst impacts of climate? We don't know. It is not a linear world. I think there's an assumption in a lot of computer models that it is a linear world, and therefore we're progressing like this. And if we do these things, that curve will change. That's not true. It's not like you're on a straight line. You're on a straight line until something changes, and then you're on a different straight line. They aren't modeling that. So when you say, do we have time to make these huge changes? Look, this is a pivotal year, and I'll just talk some of the ways. Look, we've had a huge change in America politically. We have a huge change in American business over the last 7 months that is dramatic and in multiple ways that you've heard of. JP Morgan, GM, Ford, BlackRock, huge companies, but also an explosion in terms of innovation and entrepreneurship. So there's huge changes. This is also the year 2021 where we will basically have the follow-up UN conference to Paris in Glasgow in November. And all of the countries of the world will come in with nationally determined commitments, what they promise to do going forward. And we'll see from that what people are promising, not what they're going to do necessarily, but what they're going to promise to do. So when you say, do we have time? We're going to get a chance to see what countries are willing to do. The technology's ahead of where we thought we'd be. The world is worse off in a natural world state than we thought it would be. And the big thing to understand is we don't have a system that we completely understand or control. So that if, for instance, we really melted the tundra and all that methane escaped, we're in a different curve. If we cut down 20 to 25% of the Amazon and it becomes self-defeating, it starts to turn into a desert, which happens somewhere between 20 and 25%. How much of the Amazon have we cut down? Somewhere around 20%. So we're playing with things we don't control that put us in a different place. Do we have time to do this? Yes. Do I believe that this is something totally under our control? No. Are we going to have to end up with, drawdown? I think a lot of people think we're at a place where we're going to have to. The luxury that we can do nothing and go back to 1750 in the natural world, I think that's wishful thinking. So we're in a place where we have to act dramatically. I think the Biden administration knows this. I think that they ran on it. I think they promised it. I think they're acting on it. But we're 15%. 85% of the emissions in this world don't come from the United States. And that 15% is inevitably going down regardless of what we do. So we're in a place. We wasted 4 years, for goodness sakes. We all know it. Under Mr. Trump, we did 4 years we didn't have to spare. And so we're in a position technologically where there's an awful lot we can do that won't hurt us one bit economically. But that's why I said if I could have one wish, be the education and empowerment of young girls and women. That would change the software in a way that you could say we have a much better chance of sustainability, broadly speaking.
So let's say you're leading a delegation to Glasgow. What are you going to say?
Well,
and what are you going to say you're doing?
If I'm leading the delegation from the United States of America, the first question I want to say is, what are we bringing to the table? So we're talking to the Fiji Islands. We're talking to islands around the world that are 2 inches above sea level. We're talking to African countries and Southeast Asian countries where there's a lot of development to bring them up to any sense of middle-class living, and India. So what are we bringing to the table? I mean, are we bringing technology to the table? Are we bringing finance to the table? What are we bringing to the table so that this is something that works for them? And how is this going to work so that we're together addressing this problem? So the United States is not going to the smaller, poorer countries in the world and saying to them, we caused a big problem and we want to keep emitting like crazy, and therefore you can't move to do what you want to do. That is not an argument that's going to go very far.
Right. Well, it goes back to the point you made at the beginning, right? Which is that if you lead with justice, you're going to come to a different policy conclusion, even if you're aiming at the same goal, which is to reduce greenhouse gases and get us, attacking, climate change
I
where we
think
can.
that's true. I mean, Gerald,
is that
and that's why I
the
said,
point you were making?
if I were doing that, I would sit down with you and I would sit down with people and say, what is the right thing to happen here? Like when we go into that room and they push us, I don't want to be bluffing. I want to say, no, we've thought this through. This is the way to do it. We're on your side. We're on the side of justice, and we're not backing up.
Right. So if I can paraphrase you, then what you're saying is to be on the side of reducing the threat of climate change requires that we be on your side.
I think it does.
To
I
achieve
think
justice.
I don't see how it works.
Both
otherwise,
domestically and
honestly.
internationally.
I think we're at that point, and I think that the United States does. I think we're underselling ourselves in many ways. We have a lot to bring to the table. And let me say, coming from justice is also bringing something to the table. I mean, let's not forget, this was a country that prided itself on standing up for the vulnerable, the people who were being dispossessed and abused. That we've been on the side, we've wanted to be on the side of the angels in this world, and that's a huge power for us. That, are we self-interested? Sure, we're self-interested, but are we people who are decent and want to stand up for what's right in the world, democracy and fairness and equality? Yes, and that gives us, if we can, but we have to retake that, because obviously those are things that Mr. Trump walked away from completely. And he described those countries that we're talking about having moral authority as being despicable places full of people he didn't respect and, insulted very directly and, if I may say so, kind of vulgarly.
Vulgarly. No, you're not going to get any objection from me on that characterization. No, it was a vulgar characterization, but so there's an ethical dimension to your organizing, right? So when you choose to
listen
support,
to
how do
other
you make
people,
those
honestly,
judgments?
I think the other thing that's true, Gerald, is let's not forget, American business is the strongest in the world. People forget this. This is the place where we do the research, which of course Mr. Trump wanted to can. It's crazy. This is the place where we do the startups and the entrepreneurship and create the new stuff. We have to do that, and we have to bring that to the table. I mean, one of the things that's great is we can say to people without electricity, clean electricity is cheaper. We're not asking you to make a sacrifice. We're going to help you do it cheaper for yourselves in a way that's better from a greenhouse gas and pollution standpoint than you would otherwise do. We are going to provide something better and cheaper for you because it's important for us too. And so we're not hiding that it's important to us, but we have the technology to help you, and we're going to supply.
I mean, that's an important point, I think, because if you frame philanthropy or frame organizing in the way you did, right, this isn't about just giving, right? It's about creating a new place that we can both occupy, right?
Well,
so
I mean,
we're going to benefit. You're going to benefit.
That you see traveling around the country, Gerald, and I said, we used to go, we'd visit the most polluted zip code in a state. So, we would go to a place outside Detroit, and we'd always go to a church because that's where people meet. We'd be in a church basement, always with people of color who would have dead relatives, sick relatives, and be sick themselves. And they would describe what was going on in their community. And always someone from our team would have to leave the room and go in the bathroom and cry. And so when you see, we're talking about human beings. It's not, I don't even like the word pollution, because pollution is like a theoretical Econ 101 word. I like words that human beings can relate to, like poison. It's poison. You die. You get really sick. You go into the hospital. Right. They cut out your kidney. Right. Yeah. That's poison. Right. And that's what we're talking about. And when you're talking about, coal plants, you're talking about people dying early. You're talking about people who get lung disease in their early 40s who don't smoke. You're talking about people suffering, innocent people living their lives so that other people can make money. We don't need that. The tech is here. It really is, and it's going to get better. So we're in a place where we can do this, but we're going to have to be organized and we're going to have to be relentless. It's this is not a nice to have. A planet to live on is not a nice to have. It's a we need to have.
Right. No, I love that characterization, right? Because the asking us to be relentless and you taking the position that you're going to be relentless, right, is the thing that meets the challenge, right? That we don't have the luxury not to be relentless, right?
We do. People are acting as if this is a mathematical problem. So many greenhouse gas. So many parts per million. We're at, I think 417 last night. And, say if we get to this number by this time, this is going to be the temperature, and therefore this is going to happen. I think we have proved this year or in 2020, that we don't know what's going to happen. We don't know when the forests are going to burn. We don't know when the sea is going to be so acidic that things happen that we never would have expected. It's too complicated for us. So, it's not a question of avoiding the problems of climate. We have the problems of climate. The question is, how far are they going to go? And shouldn't we be acting urgently? Because we don't know when we hit a wall.
No, so I mean the point you made, right? Let me see. I'm going to recharacterize it a little bit. You can tell me if I'm wrong, right? It's that we have to be modest in the sense that we can't know for certain, but we have to act as if the future is in our hands.
We do.
And if we don't act, we know where we're going to get to, right? And so we have to act as if we can make the change, and the change will actually produce the good we want.
We're so used to looking at history, and it's always worked out. It's like, it was going really badly, and we didn't win anything in World War II, and then everything turned out just fine. And all of American history is like, it was going really badly, and then it worked out just fine. We're in a place where I really hope that's true, but we don't know. This is the real world where you act in uncertainty. And so you've got to act with the awareness that you have to be as urgent as possible because you don't understand. And also, to be fair, Gerald, we obviously have a huge democracy problem, right? We have a very divided country. We've all been watching a concerted, literal attack on the Congress. And a month ago, hard to believe, we've seen amazing divisiveness politically in our country, and we're all aware of it. So the question is, how are we going to pull back together? And I've always thought, one way to pull back together is take on a huge task together, succeed together, being on a winning team again together, caring about each other. And that is how we actually pull together, is by doing something great together.
I love that characterization. Right? I love that characterization because the idea, right, that the thing that can bind us together, right, is solving the hardest problem we face.
And the people from Texas know a hell of a lot about energy. And they've got a ton of wind down there, and it's pretty darn sunny. So, you know what? You don't want to have the waters running over Houston. Let's get on.
Well, they've had the waters running over Houston and now, right? It's no, I mean it's funny, because what Texas gets on
They
windy
have the most
days, what
wind energy in the
28% of
country
its
by far.
electricity
Not
from
the
wind?
highest percentage, which is Iowa, but the most, absolutely.
Right. Right. So, I think you're right. I think we do have the technology to solve it. I think so. In terms of concrete changes that you're trying to support,
Well, the thing that I've been focusing
what
on in
are
the last
those
couple of
concrete
months is
changes?
kind of the nexus between policy and finance and business. Because I really do feel as if the Biden administration is focused on the politics, focused on the policy. They've taken a series of executive actions. They ran on a climate program, the Build Back Better program, to rebuild the country and country's infrastructure in a clean way. $2 trillion, millions of good paying union jobs, specific attention to environmental justice communities, 40% of the impact aimed at those communities that have been disproportionately poisoned. But what also has to happen is the entrepreneurship, the business generation, the job generation, our ability to reinvent how we do business, how we make products, how we make electricity throughout the whole economy. And so to me, the government part is critical, but it doesn't happen without the private sector, and it doesn't happen without the connection between the public and private sector. And so I feel as if that is a place where I am really interested in helping to create that ecosystem that lets us as a country together attack these problems, succeed in them, and really create, a business infrastructure, a private sector that complements the government. That's, we obviously need that. We're obviously behind, and, we're going to have to concentrate and work our tails off to make it happen from a climate perspective, a jobs perspective, and a racial and economic justice perspective.
So, what part? You said you wanted to focus. Excuse me. You wanted to focus on the business part of that ecosystem.
Well, I think there's a bunch of stuff
what's missing?
I think that the question is what is going to enable the most basic research to turn into real products, real companies, real jobs as fast as possible, as consistently as possible. So there's all kinds of connections between steps that have to be easy for companies to get done, that it can't just be a thousand flowers blooming independently, but there's really an ecosystem for these companies to get it done, to get financed, to get connected, to really move the country and the world forward. And that's something I'm incredibly excited about it, to be honest. I think that it's going to be, I think we're going to see an explosion of American creativity and energy, and that's human energy. And that's something that I want to see, I want to participate in, and I want to be proud of.
I think that's great. It's funny. There's a musician who got a Genius Award, right? And what he said was, look, I'm not a genius. Like, to be able to do the stuff I did, he said, I'm a genius. There has to be a scene.
Yes.
I have to be able to fit in and learn from other people, produce, right? The energy feeds off one another.
I completely
and
agree with that.
That's not there.
I've always
I
thought,
don't do what I was going to do.
How does
right?
growth happen? How does entrepreneurial activity happen? And it's always in these sort of entrepreneurial creative hubs. Why is Detroit? Why is the movie business in LA? Why is the tech business in Silicon Valley? Why is finance on Wall Street? It's for what you're saying. It's the scene. And it you have a lot of frenemies. Gerald and I are competing to do it. We're also friends, and we share interaction. We do stuff together, but we're also pushing. I'm like, well, if Gerald can do it, for God's sakes, anybody can do it. Even I could do it.
Exactly. No, I think that's absolutely critical. I think the idea of figuring out where you can build the things that are going to generate those.
And
that
let me say this too, Joe, because I know we're supposedly here talking about philanthropy. No, I just want to make a point about it because this is really what it comes down to.
Yeah, I should ask you
Kat Taylor
questions
and I
about
started a community bank on a nonprofit basis more than 15 years ago. And it went from $0, it's over $1.2 billion. And it's committed to economic justice, environmental sustainability, financial sustainability, because it has to be able to sustain itself if we're going to have federal deposit insurance. And it pushes specifically to support businesses owned and operated by women and people of color. It's part of a economic world. It's not giving money away. It's empowering people to succeed in their own under their own steam, but filling in the places in finance that were empty because of prejudice or bigotry or ignorance.
No, I would say I'm friends with somebody your wife helped out, Catherine Flowers. And that's she's a perfect example of that, right? And the investment in her
and Catherine's
and
a perfect. You're asking
can
what
produce
happens when you travel around the United States.
Just outlined.
You meet people like Catherine Flowers, who's a brilliant person, who's dealing with real world problems brilliantly. In her case, polluted water in Alabama, in her home state, but someone who's standing up, making a difference, being a leader, teaching the rest of us about the part of the world she comes from, what the problems are and the solutions. And she's a perfect example, honestly, Gerald, of why, it really is fun to travel around this country because, she doesn't live down the street from me. She lives across the country from me. She's experienced something that I haven't experienced, and she's dealing with it in a really creative, smart, impactful way. And it's like, yeah. And is my life better for knowing her and understanding and what she's done and learning? Yeah, way better.
I mean, we should be talking about philanthropy, and I do want to get back to that. But one of the reasons I started the conversation the way I started, right, is that I was betraying my own bias, right? I really believe you learn more by talking to people and listening to them, right, than imagining that you know the solutions in advance, right? So what
you got it.
When I do environmental justice, I want to go talk to people who are on the front lines.
Really, we all live in our little bubbles. Right? Everybody does, and the most fun part of life is getting outside of your bubble to increase your understanding and to share some part of your heart with somebody else, and get that, mutual exchange that is, to me. Oh my God, that's such a deep, that is a spiritual exchange. And what we've tried to do, what I've tried to do is to be involved in things that are not just talk. That's why I mentioned the bank. We've been doing this thing about farm to table in the public schools of California. California food for California kids. Fresh, healthy food for kids who are getting free and reduced lunches. We're in a third of the schools of California. California schools serve 1 billion meals a year. And you kind of go, you meet those kids, you meet the teachers and administrators who are providing lunch, you change their health and their performance in school. You're participating with them in them trying to improve society through their existence and their work.
So if I can understand your approach to philanthropy, and you can say you're dead wrong, Gerald, get out of here, right? But your approach to philanthropy is to create
and it's to participate with
problems,
not to I'm very, as you said, I'm very scared
and participate with them,
the two of us sitting alone in a room and solving other people's problems. But I'm very interested in working with
Exactly.
other people with their leadership and knowledge to try and provide solutions and to work through things that may have real impact. And the participation of it is something that, you know, really changes your relationship to the problem, to the people involved, you know, to your understanding. You know, I'm a sort of learn by doing thing. And so, you know, NextGen, we're not just talking about how important it is for young people to vote. We're the biggest youth organizer in American history. I mean, are we talking about it? Yeah, we talk about it. But mostly we can sit here and show you the differential impact in terms of turnout and then what that meant for elections. I mean, it's, you know.
Right.
And we do them, you know,
I mean,
it's like
there's
how do you
turnout,
get
and then
people to turn
there's
out?
education on the issues, right?
Talking to them about why what they already believe will be different if they participate. Not to convince them to change their mind, to convince them that their participation is valuable and impactful.
Right. I mean, the other thing you said at the beginning, an hour ago, we're getting towards the end of the hour already, is that the people you met weren't victims, right? They'd experienced hardship, but the conversation suggested a way out. Right? Does that drive the way you think about organizing and philanthropy?
I believe they're smart. I believe Americans are brave and compassionate. I think they can be trusted. And I don't ever want to think of us as victims. Even when bad things are happening to us, that just means we need to get together and make sure that stops and get to a better place. And I view an awful lot of the anger in our society that is very, very prevalent and goes across, you know, huge swaths, the majority of American society, people who feel that the government's not working for them, that the society itself doesn't care about or respect them.
Right.
And, you know, my attitude is that's not okay. I understand that. And the question is, how do we sit down with nurses and make sure that doesn't happen? How do we ensure that that not only doesn't it happen, but they know it? You know, I sat with a group of nurses in Las Vegas, biggest public hospital in Las Vegas. So I'm having lunch with them. And once again, not all women, very diverse group of people. I started by saying, look, you guys, do you like your jobs? And they go, we love our jobs. We love our jobs. And I said, is that because you have a strong union and good wages and benefits? And they looked at me like I was crazy. And they go, no, we're saving lives. We work in the best hospital in Las Vegas. And some of them were nurses. Some of them were literally the people who were cleaning the wards. Some of the people were orderlies. They said, no, you don't understand. You get sick in Las Vegas, you get hurt in Las Vegas, you come here. This is the best care in Las Vegas. We're extremely proud. We're saving lives. I said, okay, so who do you think stands up for you? So very high-minded people. I did one shift cleaning a ward and I was like, woo, I forgot how hard it is. It's hard, really. I said, well, who do you think stands up for you? Who do you look to for leadership and you know, really have your back in society? And they're like, nobody. I was like, really? Nobody? Like, we're on our own. I mean, they trusted their union. They were all union workers. But in terms of government support, they honestly felt like people didn't have their back. That can't happen in America. That can't happen when hardworking people who are doing a very tough, dirty job because they believe in it feel like they're abandoned by society. That's not right.
So then the giving that you do, right? And I'm glad you think about it as organizing, because I think it is. It sounds like it's as much about building the intermediate institutions, private institutions that can lead the way for public solutions to emerge. I mean, that sounds like what you're
symbolism. I don't think I've said that. If I were going to Yale Law School, you would not give me an A for that statement, but let me explain what I mean. Like we started a regenerative agriculture ranch, a grass-finished cattle, chicken, pig operation in Pescadero, California, to prove that we could raise healthy animals in a way that rejuvenated the soil and sequestered a lot of carbon net. And our goal was, look, are we going to change the world in one small operation in Pescadero, California? No. But our goal was to influence the way 1 million acres in California were farmed or ranched. And we're at 2.4. It's the same thing with our bank. I mean, there are $2 trillion banks. We're at 1.2 billion. You know, I don't have to take the SATs again, but last I checked, there's a big difference between these two. Do we think we're going to change the world with a bank that size? No. Do we think we can have substantive impact in the communities we're in? We absolutely know we can. But more than that, we're making a point. You should be doing this. There's no reason for you not to be doing this, Mr. Chase Manhattan Bank. There is no reason for you not to be doing this, Mr. Bank of America. And that's the same thing as we're trying to make a point in the real world. We're trying to connect with people and get wisdom from them. And we're trying to show that actually, you know, it's also so fun, much more fun, Gerald, to actually be working with people, to have a real honest to God relationship, to be in the community, you know, and you're not just talking theoretically over a nice lunch at the Yale Club. You're actually doing something on the ground to change people's lives. It's a much better learning, but it's also much better in terms of it's much more.
No, I mean, I think you're right, because one of the things that you, if I can take your point, right, is you know, regardless of how small, right, they're examples of possibility, right, and you accumulate those the successful possibilities, right, and you show that it can be done. That sounds like what's
really, you know,
driving,
I would say, you know, the NextGen really is.
And
If
even
you
the
look at
creation of the
youth
bank.
turnout, it made all the difference in 18 and 20. Honestly, that isn't the way the press likes to talk about it. They don't cut things by age. But if you look at what happened in 2018 and what happened in 2020, youth turnout is, look, it's the biggest group of people in America voting at half the rate of everybody else. If they come up to everybody else, it's not like some tiny little thing at the margin. It's boom, this biggest group, boom. It's a huge change. It changes elections, no question about it. We're talking about trying to make big.
I mean, we're
changes,
not talking,
you know,
we're not talking about
regenerative
marginal
agriculture.
change here.
That's not like a, you know, niche, polite thing that we're doing, you know, for the fun of it. That is a critical change in American society. Treating people fairly in terms of the ownership of businesses. Look, traveling around the country, I remember being in Las Vegas, talking to an African-American audience, very distinguished, well-dressed 75-year-old guy, said to me, Tom, they just rebuilt the stadium for the new NFL team in Las Vegas. That is a league that is 70% African-American players. What percentage of the people building that stadium, the companies were African-American owned? 2. Our bank is designed to address that problem. That's not right. And, you know, I talked to plenty of African-Americans with plenty of business experience and should be qualifying for loans who couldn't get loans. Like, what's going on here? You know, we're trying to be in the places they're really impactful. And we're trying to figure out how do you have real impact in those places substantively and also, you know, in terms of providing you know, an image of what is possible so people understand what's wrong and what can be done about it.
No, I think that's great. Now the hour's up, and so we have to bring this to a close, unfortunately. But if I can, people are going to be mad at me for not asking you question after question about philanthropy. But I think if I can summarize, that building the capacity through the lens of justice for people to make the changes that need to be made, right, is part of what drives you. You know, if they were going to, if I could characterize the organizing and philanthropy that you've done, it's driven in that direction. And I want to thank you for taking this time with us. I was glad you remembered sitting in the bar at the Mayflower. That was fun. I wish
Here's
someday we'll have time
here's
to
my
do that
invitation
again.
to you.
And when the pandemic is
And to everybody
over,
listening, the next time they have the Yale Harvard game in New Haven, we will meet either Friday or Saturday night at the bar at the study. Drinks are on me.
Okay.
That's an invitation. That's not a joke.
All right. I want everybody who heard that to, all right. No, we'll be there. We'll be there. Thank you, Tom, and thank you for all you do. NextGen continues to be an inspiration, and building the infrastructure for real climate change, I think, is really
total pleasure
what you're doing. And so thank you. Thank everyone.
At the bar, at the study.
Okay, take care.